Hey, everybody, it's Kevin and Marina. We're so excited to be with you guys on the Herbalism Show. We've got a really fun episode for you today. I'll hit our video and then we'll get things kicked off with Marina. All right, Marina. So today is whole plant versus natural products. And I think in the description, we kind of said there's so much verbiage passed around on what things mean in the dietary supplement space or the food categories as referenced by the FDA. So excited to have you here today. How are you?
Absolutely. Yes, I'm so excited to dive into this topic because I think there's a lot of misinformation or people are just assuming certain things or even in the pharmacy space where we're supposed to be the ones that are educated on this, there's a lot of questions that come up as far as, well, what is herbalism? What makes it a whole food product or a whole plant product? And all of these definitions and terms constantly thrown around. So I think that's kind of where we need to start the conversation sometimes, is just by defining certain terms so it doesn't get confusing. And yes, there's definitely government regulations for some of these things, but for the most part, people, I think, are confused with what is regulated, what are the regulations, and again, what is the term and definition. So let me just start with whole plants, right, as a starting point. So what is that? Right? So whole plants are anything that is sold or available and exists in nature as a whole entire plant, meaning we're not actually extracting pieces or oils or standardizing certain ingredients or phytochemicals from inside of that to make it into a product. So essentially, it's the least processed available product or the actual plant that we see in nature. And in terms of medicinal uses or applications, it's whole plants that are used medicinally or to support health. So whether it's a whole herb that we're using as a spice that we talked about in the last episode, or it's a whole plant that we're eating as a food that can be good for us and for maintaining our health, or that we are actually using the whole plant medicinally. So we're wanting some specific effects to boost immunity, let's say. That's a popular topic nowadays too. Or for anything else, maybe energy or sleep. So if we're actually using the whole entire plant for those purposes, that's a whole plant. Now, the whole natural supplement industry is a whole different story.
Can I ask you a question on whole plant? So when I think of like the word whole plant, I'm literally in my mind thinking, if I can grab something, pull it up by the roots, there's the entirety of the plant, that I have in my hands. But when we're talking about whole plant here, you're really talking about the manipulation process post, what's happening. So whole plant, and please correct me, whole plant could be just leaves. Whole plant could be dried. Whole plant could be crushed in some way or manipulated outside of a chemical process. Are there any other definitions, like to be able to help people go, it is seeds, it is flowers, it is et cetera, to really break down what that whole plant could include?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when we say whole plant, it could refer to, like you said, the entirety of the plant with everything. Sometimes we do use all the parts of a plant medicinally, but sometimes we do use certain parts for different purposes, or sometimes we use specific parts of the plant or of it, the growing season. So say we use the seeds or the flowers or the roots or the leaves, and then we use them all in different seasons. And yes, sometimes we process them mechanically in certain ways, which would be the least processing that would still allow it to be called a whole plant. So it's either a whole entire plant or a part of that plant that we're referring to. And yes, usually it's either available fresh or dried or desiccated, or powdered. And then the other thing that in herbal medicine that we do is, out of those parts, we can make teas. So that's how we can reconstitute it, right, and make it palatable to ourselves. And then the other common form that we use in herbalism is a tincture. So a tincture uses that whole dried or fresh part of the plant that's usually crushed up in some way. And then we use a solvent in a liquid form, usually hydroalcoholic or glycerite. And then we put the solvent together with the plant matter, wait 4 to 6 weeks, or there's a few different methods. There's percolation, but the idea is that we're trying to extract the medicinal components and the phytochemicals of the plant and transfer that into the solvent so that we can just then take the plant matter out, strain it out, and use that tincture for the medicinal purposes that the plant has now transferred over.
So there's the one like piece that I need your expertise on is that element of using a solvent. Once we've used the solvent on the whole plant, is the result of that still considered whole plant? And hopefully this is the gray area we can say like, here's where the shifts happen.
Yes. So for the most part, I would still consider that whole plant. But it is probably the most gray area question. Yes, because we are sort of extracting parts of that plant within this process. Not every part of the plant is going to be able to transfer over. So it's going to depend on the hydrophobic or hydrophilic components of those parts, and then what the vehicle is the solvent more hydrophobic or hydrophilic, and then that will determine the concentration of the solutes that are going to get transferred over. So it does become a gray area, but it's still not as isolated and reductionist as extracting one active ingredient, which is what the rest of the pharmaceutical industry is doing.
Right. Okay. Super helpful. No, I love that. So the other part of the equation is that catch-all word, natural products.
Yes.
So help me out, Marina. Like I feel like now I feel like an expert in whole plant, and I could go into Marina's kitchen and really be her sous chef. But with natural products, now what are we thinking when we hear that, and what are some of the concerns with it? Because I know you and I've talked before about organic or other terms that are used out there that are buzzwords that can increase price. And sometimes the word natural products, I feel like almost falls into the same vein, but give us some more breakdowns.
Yes. So natural product really is this catch-all phrase, and it can refer to a lot of different things as long as there's some natural components that originated, within the processing of that product. It can be labeled natural product. So that's why this whole industry exists, where something that once existed as a natural plant or, something that grew on the earth that is natural, that's usually the reference to natural, but then it can undergo various processing to still be able to be sold and marketed as a natural product. So if you look at different labels in products that are out there, whether it's a food or a medicine or an over-the-counter supplement, you can see what the ingredients are and which parts of it originated from natural or whole plants. But sometimes they do extract certain components to be able to market it as certain things, or it's a whole soup of different products and or different excipients like natural flavors. That's a whole different topic too. So how do they derive these natural flavors? They actually undergo a whole lot of usually chemical processes to then be able to call the natural flavor. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of reactions in between that we're not aware of. So the processing itself could affect the integrity of the product that you end up with. And then it also affects how our body recognizes these products. And does our body recognize these processed products as the same natural form that the body has evolved to take as food or to take as a substance that's beneficial? And does our body know how to then label and process these things that we're putting into our body? So that's the question.
And that's so perfectly said, because like you've mentioned before, we often go toward purity, which we talked about in a previous episode, talk about going toward purity, but purity is a poor term. Like that's highly chemically altered. Like that maybe is the better way for us to say it. And how our body processes and handles that appropriately can be a big change, and can cause some deleterious effects because of the lack of balance in the products that we're consuming. The example that I'd love to hear, Marina, and I was trying to pull up a graphic on my side, and I know I've seen them, but any examples that you have of, okay, for the breakdown, for the pharmacy students, for the medical students, nurses, et cetera, that are watching, here is something that here's the whole plant form, and here are the other derivations of it, that we see throughout the flow.
Yeah, I think one easy example is sugar and sugar substitutes, right? So sugar came from the sugar cane plant, but that is very raw and unrefined, and it's a whole different ballgame when it's in the plant form than when you process it out. We bleach it, we do all kinds of things to purify it, and
Yeah.
then we take it out of context of the plant. So we strip some of the fibers and some of the other things, like some fats or other components that the natural whole plant has. And so when we purify something to be just crystalline sugar, right, it takes on a different property, right, which is nice. We can now put it in all sorts of confectionery goods. But again, outside of the context of the plant, it's going to have a different pharmacological effect and then spike our blood sugar and insulin, et cetera. Whereas the whole plant may not necessarily have the same function in the body. And other sugar substitutes, a popular one nowadays is stevia, right? And stevia is this plant, and it's actually kind of bittersweet. It's got this bitter aftertaste. And as a plant, it has a completely different property than the stevia sugar packets that we're using, that we still don't really know the long-term effects because it hasn't been around for that long. But I am kind of hesitant to jump on the bandwagon of those processed sweeteners. I'd rather just have a little bit of honey or molasses or maple syrup, which is derived from a whole plant and has minimal processing. And so you have kind of like this mixture, and the whole plant is usually more protective, and because it's not reductionist or purified or isolated. So it's kind of like this interesting balance where purity is good on the one hand, because we're wanting a specific action, but then we have to realize that that action has a caveat, because you're stripping away some potentially synergistic or beneficial properties, and now we're learning about the microbiome and how we are just a walking microbiome, and there needs to be diversity for optimal health and resilience. And when we're purifying things, it's hard for us to carry that balance to over outside of the whole plant, outside of that context. So another just easy example, but things like the poppy plant, right? And how when you purify that and isolate it and create an opioid, and a pure opioid substance, morphine, right? It carries then a whole different spectrum, and it's a much more narrow therapeutic index, and so addictive, and so many problems now with the opioid crisis. Finally, they're starting to recognize it, but that's the difference between a poppy plant, right? Just making some tea with the milky latex and the seed is a totally different pharmacological effect than making an alkaloid, extracting the alkaloid, and just using that as a drug.
Perfect example. That one I think is, both of them are great, just from two very different angles on the application. One in everyday life, which, as we know, with the rampant increases of diabetes and other healthcare issues related to weight gain, sugar usage, can be a little problematic. I think we can agree on that. And then the exact same thing when it comes to the utilization of opiates. I mean, for me, being a farming kid, like thinking about mint, like the utilization of mint and how often we apply that and where we apply it in terms of oils and flavoring extracts and all the other things, versus literally having a real mint leaf, that you're utilizing inside of your tea. So I love, and I thank you for the whole plant versus natural kind of products piece. Any other parting words when it comes to folks taking this information and applying it?
Yes. So just consider, going into the pharmacy or the supermarket, you're going to see so many things labeled naturals, from cosmetics to, body care, shampoo, whatever you're using topically. And then also internally, you're going to see lots of beverages and foods labeled naturally, and then packaging. And then if you're looking at over the counters or medicines, you're also going to see lots of natural products like essential oils and homeopathic products and vitamins and minerals and herbal teas and herbal supplements. So there's just a plethora of things out there, but I just want to encourage you to understand that a lot of it is marketing, and people that are marketers know what sells and what trigger words to use. But they also know that the legislature is not as clear, and there is kind of lax regulations around natural products that are either topical or non-prescription. So we have to do the research and make sure to read those labels and understand, is this a minimally processed whole plant product, or is this something that has some tiny component of something that used to be natural once upon a time?
Love it. Yeah, I'm looking forward to you guys hearing. We have episodes coming up that I really feel like are going to help tie in, like, why are we focusing on whole plant, and be able to understand the importance of that when we're impacting kind of your overall thinking of how we're treating and or helping patients to remain healthy utilizing whole plants. And so thank you guys so much for joining us. Thank you, Marina. You guys have a wonderful day. If you want to see more of what Marina is doing, head on over to RPH Ally, join her channel on the Herbalism channel, and to get tons more insights, when it comes to what's going on. And then if you want to become a true expert, Marina has a wonderful course to be able to break things down for you, so you can really jump in and become someone that can follow those footsteps of using more whole plant medicine and connecting with your patients in a whole new way. All right, we'll talk to you guys soon.